Hey, it's Bitty Penny. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm making 12 cards, and this is simple stamping, and it's for beginners. So if you're a beginner, welcome to card making. It's a beautiful place to be. And I hope you enjoy this video. Okay, so I'm playing with some pattern paper today. Now I chose this pad because it was sent to me by one of my sweet friends and subscribers here, Miss Eileen, and I just loved it. It's called Hocus Pocus. It's definitely geared for Halloween, fall. So I wanted to play with it. Now this one's unique because it gives you a large and a small print of the same patterns. Most pads aren't like this. This is also an 8x8. That makes this pad unusual as well. I mean, you definitely find 8x8 paper out there, but it's not very common. Okay, for the small petite pattern, I am going to make that my background. So it measured 6 3/4 by 4 3/4. Then for this larger pattern, that's going to be like up with my focal point as a top layer. So I'm cutting that one to 5 3/4 by 4. And so basically, one side is like an inch shorter and the other one's like 3/4 of an inch shorter, as I'm showing you here. Now, if I just left them like that, you need something to break up that layer, especially because they are the same pattern. So I did add a matting layer. So basically I'm matting that top layer, and this one measures 6 by 4 1/4. Okay, so out of one sheet of paper, if I cut on the 11-inch side at 6 inches, then I was able to get 3 mats from one sheet of cardstock. So, you cut at 6 on the 11-inch side, and then you turn it, and on the 8.5-inch side, you cut it at 4 1/4. That gives you 2, and then you take your scrap piece and cut that down to 6 by 4 1/4. These are my scraps, so I'm going to sort these all out because I use everything. So I'm going to sort these out by size at first. Now I did have a miscut in my cutting when I was just figuring all of this out. So that was that first sheet of paper. So I had a miscut, but that's no worries. That will be used as well. It's just something to calculate into my designs later when I go back to use these scrap pieces of paper. Okay, today I'm using red rubber stamps. Now these are not mounted. This is unmounted, clean red rubber stamps. Right now I'm putting this on my board and I'm just measuring it out. I want this to be stamped as the focal point of my card, and so I want to make sure I have paper cut in pieces that it fits nicely. So I measure it out, and I decide that I can do a 4 1/4 inch strip by 2.5, so the length will be 4 1/4. Now if you take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and you cut it on the 11-inch side at 4 1/4, then you will have 2 equal sides because it's 8.5 wide. So that's what I did to make these pieces, and I was able to get 8 pieces out of one sheet of cardstock, which is fantastic. I made 13 cards here today, so I just needed to use really 1.5 sheets of cardstock. Okay, now I also go through and sort my pattern paper. Now, with mine, I did sort it because I had really specific patterns that I wanted to put together, but sometimes you could just sort it by size depending on how you're making your project. So now I'm just kind of lining everything up, and I have this dye ink from Lawn Fawn. It's called Dough. This is one of my favorite colors, but honestly, it's not one of my favorite inks. These inks just can be splotchy. Now, it didn't matter today because, basically because of the design of the stamps. It did matter when I went and stamped my sentiment, but I really wanted my sentiment to match, and so I just went for it anyways. But, not all inks are created equal, and it can be hard sometimes to get very honest commentary sometimes on that. I'll cover that in another video, but I still keep these in my collection because they just have some unique colors, but I'm careful about when I use them because I know they don't stamp evenly. I don't really like the performance of this dye ink overall. There's definitely others that I like more. So I'm just stamping these out, and now I'm not being real specific about where I lay this down. I'm just basically getting it centered. So I stamp this on each of the pieces. Now, the process that you see me doing here today is definitely a great way to approach mass production. You cut all your paper at once to the sizes that you need. This is a great approach when you have like a sketch and you know what sizes you need to cut your paper at. That's not really the kind of crafting that I typically do. I typically am winging it from one card to the next. But if I do need to sit down and mass produce some cards, then this is how I do it. For this sheet of paper, I'm using one of the black scraps, and I'm cutting each piece down to 3/4 of an inch. I actually, let's see, I have the card in front of me, so let me measure that other piece. The other piece is so these are 1.5 by 3/4. These little black strips. Okay, but you wouldn't have to be that specific. Now, what I'm doing here is stamping off. So I'm getting the second impression on my card. So I put my red rubber stamp in the ink. I stamp it on a scrap piece of paper, and then I stamp it a second time, or a second generation, onto my card front. This is great when you're first starting out. It's a way to get varying tones of the same color, or shades of the same color is more accurate. And so it gives you an extension on your ink palette because you can get a lighter shade if you need it by just stamping off. Okay, now I'm just kind of centering this with my eye, and I'm going to use these little black strips that I created as just another detail on this card. Careful with black cardstock and glue. Okay, so here I have just a strip. It's not quite 1/2 inch strip of paper, and it's cardstock. And I'm just going to stamp this happy birthday sentiment all along this strip, and then I can cut off each one as I go. I did decide I wanted to pop this up, and I use a double-sided foam tape for this, and I actually order mine on Amazon. You get 2 big rolls for like $12. If you just search in Amazon for foam tape for scrapbooking, you will find lots of options, and I have been using this for years, at least 3 years, and I really like it. And then I put another one of those strips down at the bottom here. So that finishes off the front of my card for now. I want to address the inside of my card. So in 2021, my card making resolution was to start decorating the insides of my cards. And now when I get done with a card, if I leave it blank on the inside, it feels unfinished. It's almost been a year, and it's a definite change in me. I didn't feel that way before, but after doing this for this last year, I definitely do. So I always like to do something now on the inside, or I just feel like my card is not finished. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking the smallest strip that I had left over. If you're not using a by 8 paper for this specific design, if you were trying to follow it to a T, then you would have different size scraps. So I am making 5 by 7 cards. If you had 6 by 6 paper pads and you were making A2 cards, you could still get some of these same scraps. Okay, now I used a different ink for this. I used a Catherine Puller ink. This ink would be one that I would highly recommend for a new stamper because it stamps perfectly every time. I mean, if anything, it can get too juicy for you, but it is like these are considered pretty detailed stamps, and they just stamp perfectly every time. It is a fantastic ink, and I would highly recommend it as a die stamping ink. Okay, I want to show you, when you have a grid mat and you want to line things up, use your grid. You know, make sure that the fold of your card is in a certain place, and then you can line up the other pieces and get things straight. So little pads like this I find to be fussy, and I think that's a little bit dangerous to like ink up my stamp over my card. I say dangerous because I'm shaky and I can drop things and then ruin my card that is nearly complete. So I do prefer these larger pads. And here's what I mean about this ink being splotchy. It just is. It's a splotchy ink. So I'm going to stamp this down. And I know that some people say, oh, it'll even out as it dries, but I don't find that it does. I just find that it stays splotchy. But I went for it mainly because this is like a sketchy design and the artwork and everything. And so I thought it would work for me today. And like I had said before, I wanted the brown to match. All right, so these are my remaining scraps, and they're pretty big. Like, these are really good size scraps. So I am definitely going to turn these into something. I'm going to make a second card design with y'all. Now this one measures 5 3/4 by 4. So this is the exact same size as the focal panel, and this is the same size mat, 6 by 4 1/4, as our first design. Okay, I'm kind of stepping aside here and I'm showing you something different. I have 3 different stamps and 3 different colors of ink. I'm going to make my own patterned background. I'm going to use the principle of thirds, and I am going to stamp the largest stamp 3 times. Then I'm going to move to the second largest stamp and get that one stamped down 3 times. And I'm just creating a pattern here, and I want to show you guys some different principles after doing this. So after making a fun pattern that you really like, you probably don't want to just cover it all up. Now here I didn't get a great impression on that, on those, I don't even know what those are, but those seeds, there's some sort of seed. But I'm not going to just throw out the panel. It's okay. It's handmade. Again, I think it just works with this type of stamp. And I know personally that lining up that red rubber is going to be treacherous. So I just leave it alone, accept it. It didn't stamp perfectly, and that's okay. Like, it's all right. So now I take my smallest stamp and I'm just filling in the background. I wanted this to be pretty simple. I didn't want to have it be too busy. So now here is that sheet of paper. I don't think that's a big enough border. Like, I would like to see more of that pattern that we just created of that background. So what if I bring in a smaller version? So this is one of the scraps. That definitely looks better to me. I like everything to have, I always call it room to breathe, but I want all of my paper to shine. And so I like my layers to be of a different enough size that you can really appreciate each layer. So I thought that this one would work. I'm using basically the same exact design that I've been using this whole time. The only difference with this card is that we stamped out a pattern with that same stamp set for our backgrounds. And I really like that card. Okay, so let's get back into using these pieces. So now these are the same size that we've been working with this whole time. And I have this on a 5x7 card base. And I am just going to glue this straight down. I like the wide, clean margins. I have been doing this for the last 2 weeks, and I'm just loving having like the wide, white, clean margin, because I just think it makes each card more clean and simple no matter what design I have going on the inside. I really like it. Okay, for these cards, I decided to bring in this washi tape, and I'm going to use this in place of those little black strips that I used on the first cards. Now, washi tape is not incredibly sticky. So I like, especially if it's a part of a design of one of my cards, then I always like to add glue to the back. I don't need a ton. I just need something to make it permanent, whereas washi tape is usually temporary. So I like to add some glue, and that's it. I kept it very simple. Now I did go in and add some wooden shapes for each card. I just thought that they would be the best embellishment, and I wanted to just add a little something extra. So let's look at this card because it's not like the others. And I think it's so lovely. Now I picked my colors based on the color wheel, based on orange. So that's why I picked the green and the turquoise, and I really like this card. Now I left that one without a sentiment, because I really like to have cards in my stash that are blank without sentiments so I can use it for any occasion. I turned 6 of the cards into thank you cards. And I just love this design. And it's so funny because this is definitely, fall colored paper. It was called Hocus Pocus. It would be great for Halloween designs. But here we turned it into birthday and thank you cards, and I love it like that too. I really like graphic design like this, where it's geometric. I really like geometric design a lot. So here are the other ones. So, I put the smallest pattern in the back because it's the busiest, and I brought the larger pattern up front, and I really like the way that turned out for all of these cards. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It's something very basic. If you notice, I didn't have to color these images. When you're looking at stamps and you're first getting started, you might really enjoy like solid stamps or stamps like this that are so detailed that coloring is not necessary. Or maybe you got into stamping because you want to color, and in that case, ignore what I'm saying. Anything goes. You're just playing with paper. That's what I always, how I like to frame up my card making is that I play with paper. Thank you so much for watching. I'll have more beginner content soon, and I'll see you next time.